Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Less than 1 year after he surprised the world by toppling the Assad regime, the reconstructed jihadist Jolani, having reverted to his original name, a-Shar'a, is due next month at the White House for the culmination of his full acceptance into civilized society. However, can the ambitious expectations held by this man and his regime be realized, keeping in mind, of course, their Al-Qaeda roots and the improbability of solving the contradiction between a strong central government and the protection of besieged communities such as the Druze and Christians in Sweden Governorate? Joining us to discuss those matters include Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad. It's good to see you, General.
Good to be here, Jonathan.
Also joining us is Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kupelvassil, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, as well as the head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division, currently the President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. It's great to see you as well, General.
Great to be with you.
And today, it's just three of us. We will try and dissect this matter as much as possible from all directions. But let's start with the Damascus regime. Obviously, this Syrian de facto leader, the president, does not control Syria. He does not control the western coast where the Alawites are present, and the Russians still maintain two bases, albeit they less of a force as they used to be during the Assad regime. They're still very much relevant. On the southern parts, we see Sweden still being besieged by this Damascus regime, where we see the Druze and Christians standing up for what they believe should ultimately be in their area, potentially self-autonomy, but not necessarily so. And the Kurds are also not necessarily playing ball, so to speak. General Kupelvassil, looking at all those complexities, the leader of Damascus is traveling to Washington, and he is coming with a message of a centralized power, which does not necessarily exist.
Yes, but I think that what he's coming with is mainly perceptions, and is in the West that he is the representative of Syria, that he controls Syria, that if you want to do something in Syria, you have to go through him. And this is the important thing, that he has made a strategic decision that he is going to focus on reconstruction of Syria after this long civil war and not on fighting anybody around. And he manages very successfully to deliver this message and to convince everybody that this is the way he has chosen throughout this last year. Everybody's tired with this never-ending civil war in Syria, with the terrible situation of the population of the need to deal with all the refugees. Everybody wants to see an end to this. And if you manage to sell the story successfully as a-Shar'a does, then you get the legitimacy you need and the money you need in order to make this happen. And that's why a-Shar'a, even though deep inside is real jihadist, and as he was for many years, he understands that there is a time when you have to put that in the back seat and focus on reconstruction and everything else. And that's the name of the game of a-Shar'a. And everybody wants to be convinced. So it's so easy. And that's how it works. And I think that we should, even though we feel suspicious about him and skeptical that he has really changed, there's no point in fighting the rest of the world. We have to be cautious, but take advantage of this new attitude of Syria. And if he doesn't manage to control Syria eventually, and his opponents from the more radical wing of the jihadists are going to challenge him, that's another story, but it shouldn't be us who are going to do that. And I think that one thing has to be said about a-Shar'a. Even when he was Muhammad al-Jolani, he was already the most cunning person in this jihadi group. I believe that he's going to get out from the White House with what he is looking for, pat on the shoulder from President Trump, guaranteed to invest in his project of reconstruction. And in return, he's going to give all kinds of promises regarding avoiding confrontation with Israel and showing a positive attitude towards the Kurds.
Thank you, General Kupelwasser. Obviously, the situation is still very fluid, and time will tell how those matters will eventually evolve too. But General Sofrin, I'd like to hear your take on this from your perspective, naturally being also very close, or rather closely following the situation in Syria, very much like General Kupelwasser. Do you share that optimism?
I think that Mr. Ahmed a-Shar'a made this strategic decision that he is going to rely on the US for what we call to be the basic component in his what we call a strategy or grand strategy, to support it, first of all, for reconstruction of the country. Second, maybe to give him some other benefits like weapon systems and so on, to be able to reconstruct the armed forces to some extent, even though Turkey is trying to take advantage on the situation and to give him weapon systems and to train him and to be able to get control upon that, on the armed forces and everything else. But he doesn't want to play only on one role. He wants to play what we call on a broader role. And I believe that he sees the US as a basic component. And if he gets the support of the US administration, and in addition, is going to be what we call hugged by the Americans, that means that they will give him a lot of benefits, and of course, to some extent, some agreement with Israel that will stop the hostilities and maybe even to leave or to get all the troops that were still deployed inside Syria out of Syria, and by that to have to demonstrate to his people that he's controlling the country, that they can take the Israelis out with the assistance of the Americans. And I believe this is a strategy. Now, he doesn't really control the whole country, as you said before, because he doesn't want to engage, not the Alawites, not the Kurds, not the Druze to some extent. He wants to maintain some kind of peace inside in this country, and to be able to demonstrate to the whole world that this is a peaceful country, that everybody can live together. And I think this is something that he wants to prove to the whole world, that he changed his mind, he changed his concept. He's no longer what we call a jihadist. He's now looking for peace. He's now looking for to calm the country and to rebuild its capabilities.
Nor does he control his own strategy, some may say, considering the fact that much of what he has devised and is pushing forward is, on the one hand, a Turkish Qatari strategy, on the other hand, of course, being influenced and meddled with by the Saudis, Emiratis, and others. When we look at this complexity, aren't we concerned, potentially, General Kupelwasser, that the Syrians are actually pushing the Turkish narrative when we're talking about Syria, Israel, the various complexities at hand? And in the event that an arrangement is struck between Damascus and Jerusalem vis-a-vis the southern part of Syria, that would also ensure the security of Christians and Druze in the southern part of the country, would that not bind Israel's hands when we're talking about Turkish, potentially, aspirations, as we know them, to entrench militarily in areas where Israel would be uncomfortable with?
Well, first of all, we are concerned, of course, for the strong relationships between a-Shar'a and the Turks. They were those who enabled him to survive and constitute a threat to Assad throughout those years. And they were those who were behind him when he took the initiative and invaded the areas that were controlled by President Assad beforehand and took over the rest of Syria, almost all of Syria in December last year. And he is committed to them, and he is retaining those special relations with Turkey, and the relations with the United States are not necessarily at the expense of the relations with Turkey. Amongst other reasons is that the person who is in charge of that is very close to Turkey. Ambassador Barak is close to Turkey, and he's dealing with the special envoy for Syria as well. So this is not necessarily one at the expense of the other. But having the United States in the mix limits the capabilities of Turkey to really take a-Shar'a for a ride in a tour against Israel. That's a better situation for us as long as the Americans are inside this game. They are also committed to Israel, not only to the Turkish interests. So we have to be worried and we have to be skeptical and be on alert all the time. At the same time, we have to realize you can't have a free lunch. If we want to make sure that there are no threats to Israel's security in the south, in southern Syria, if we want to make sure that the security of the Druze community in the Jabal Druze, the Druze mountain, is respected, and if we want to make sure that Iran and Hezbollah do not use Syrian soil in order to move all kinds, do not deploy in Syria itself in order to carry out attacks against Israel, as they wish, of course. As long as we are guaranteed of all of that, we cannot have all of that without a price. One of the prices we pay is that we deploy forces beyond what used to be the line that separated us and the Syrians for so many years. And this is also costly, and it comes with a price too. But this is a price we are willing to pay. But there might be other prices, like allowing Turkey to have a greater say about what's happening in northern Syria, especially vis-à-vis the Kurds, and just securing their interests in the north. And for us, this is a source of concern, not only because of what it means for Syrians and Kurds, but also because what it means in a more general regional approach, because the Turks are the upcoming force. We saw even in this proposal, in the entire attitude of the Americans towards the Turkish leadership, especially Erdogan and Turkey in general, in recent months concerning the Gaza story, Turkey was allowed to play a major role in the proposal that was presented to the Security Council yesterday by the Americans. The Turks are mentioned as a force that will be involved in the reconstruction of Gaza and the peace, the Board of Peace, and so on and so forth. So Turkey is an upcoming force, and when it comes from a person like Erdogan that is so preoccupied with his own role in the system, and somebody who wants to see the Ottomanic empire re-emerging, this is something that Israel has to be concerned about. But we have to manage how we deal in this respect with Syria. If President Trump is able to bring Shara to make a deal with us that secure our interests in Syria, just because it's also going to play in the hands of Turkey, this is not a good enough reason to deny it. We should embrace it.
Thank you, General Cooper-Wasser. Also with regard to the point about the Turks taking an active role, of course, in the situation in Syria, we also need to remember what Hakan Fidan said in his press briefing yesterday, when he highlighted, after meeting also with Khalil al-Haya, the leader of Hamas, and a number of foreign ministers from a number of countries, to include, of course, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Indonesia, and others, Pakistan as well. He did mention that when it comes specifically to Turkey's involvement, it will be very hard for them to deploy troops to advance a policy that does not necessarily align with their own national policy, referring, of course, to the disarmament of Hamas, which is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. But General Sofrin, I'd like to bring another player into the theater of Syria, which is our topic of today, and that is Russia. After earlier last month, we saw the de facto leader or president of Syria, namely Ahmed a-Shar'a, travel to Moscow, meet with Vladimir Putin, in which he affirmed that Damascus, under his leadership, recognizes all past agreements between the two countries, taking also into account that according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Damascus requires roughly 2.15 million tons of wheat and grain for the remainder of this year and the next year of 2026 in order to survive and to feed their own people in light of a drought currently plaguing his country with, in biblical proportions, some may say. And all the while, having now just last week, the defense minister of the a-Shar'a government travel to Moscow, meet with his Russian counterpart, and deliberate the prospects of Moscow enhancing their footprint in Syria. Doesn't that alarm the Turks and the Americans, who are playing here a very important role? And I'm pretty certain that that Washington would not like to see Moscow retain any type of influence in Syria.
I think that Mr. a-Shar'a has what we call a strategy to play with all the cards that he have in the pocket. And that means that, first of all, he is applying to the Americans to get the support, to get the recognition, to become one more time, and even it's only the first time in history, as we mentioned, that he's going to the White House, a Syrian president. That means that he wants to be recognized by the whole Western community as what we call an acceptable leader of Syria, and Syria will become part of what we call the human league. That's a second. Now he's looking practically. He doesn't. I'm not sure that he's very fond of the fact that Turkey is trying to play the most important and more influential role within Syria. Therefore, he is making any efforts or thinking about how to balance the Syrian influence inside the Turkish influence inside Syria. And I think that he found a way to go back to Moscow and say, okay, what was agreed between President Assad and President Putin is valid. That means you can stick to your own two bases or two garrisons. The first one is the airport in Hamimim, and the second one is what we call the naval base in Tartus. And this will be for yours forever, as mentioned and as agreed with President Bashar Assad. And by that, to balance a little bit with the Turkish influence and to give a signal to the Turks that you are not the only player in the scene. We have another players, and we have the Americans, and we have the Russians, and therefore, please be careful and don't try to overwhelm on what happens inside Syria. Now, regarding the Americans, I'm not sure that the Americans are very concerned about that because these garrisons were held by the Russians for many years before. So nothing has really changed in the situation because even when he took over Damascus and he became the president of Syria, he didn't throw them out like he did with the Iranians, for example. And if you can make the comparison, he told the Iranians, I don't want you around, not anymore. I'm going to demand compensations out of you in what we call an international court. But for the Russians, he didn't mention them not even in one word. And nevertheless, the Russians are there. They never left. They maybe reduced the deployment there for some extent, and now they're coming back in full force like they did before, taking into consideration that most of the efforts are now invested in what we call the Ukraine front, but still they have the capacity there, and they are there to stay and not to leave, and to maintain their capabilities, because it gave them a great advantage, because for the first time in history, when they got hold on Tartus naval base, they got what we call direct access to the Mediterranean Sea, something that I never had before.
Well, I think it's quite ironic, even though it's not a perfect analogy. The Pakistanis, when they took the Taliban in following the American invasion into Afghanistan, were pretty sure that they were grooming the future leaders of Afghanistan that would be their vassals, so to speak. It obviously didn't pay off, considering the immediate breakaway by those Taliban figures, who are quite aggressive to Pakistan as well. Here in this situation, we do see something similar, but not entirely, since both Turkey and Qatar have a lot more investments, or rather a grip on the defense ministry and the intelligence apparatus, as well as the religious framework that they have established there as part of the so-called Muslim Brotherhood streams in Syria. Many of those, including the Grand Mufti now of Damascus of Syria, have been groomed also in Turkey. So we see a lot of that playing out. But nonetheless, the grip on the defense ministry allows them to play a very important role, since without the strong power, nothing is going to hold in that country, and that is something that was very prudently done by the Turks. The Saudis have been more proactive, of course, in the foreign ministry with Assad al-Shibani, as well as with the president himself, Ahmed a-Shar'a, and they're playing their different strategic games, so to speak, on moving forward. This will establish different streams of power, as General Sofrin just mentioned. But nonetheless, the complexities are not ending here. There are ongoing challenges with the Iranians, who are not sitting idly by. They're waiting to see whether or not the Americans are going to withdraw. And once the Americans do withdraw, if it were to be the case, the Iranians do hope to re-enter into the theater in a reality that is still very much fluid, with much of their infrastructure still very much in place. How are we to take that, keeping in mind that we don't have very much time left for today's edition? General Kupelwasser, we'll start with you.
Well, the importance of Syria for Iran is obvious. The loss of Syria was a very painful hit that the Iranians had to suffer, and they would like to recover from that. They cannot rearm Hezbollah the way they wanted, because the bridge connected them with Lebanon was broken. And of course, they are ready to invest whatever it takes in order to regain the ability to do that. And they would like to do that either on the table, or, if necessary, under the table. And we see that they keep trying to send weapons to Hezbollah through Syria, even when they are not allowed to do that. And the Shah forces from time to time manage to foil such attempts. So it's definitely something that they would like to see happening. And we have a common interest together with Shah not to let it happen. And I think the Turks are also against it, because nobody wants to see the Iranians regaining control of Syria. And that's one of the major disagreements that characterize the situation. Everybody else is against it, including the Americans. I'm not sure about the Russians. I'm not sure even the Russians want it. They want to make sure that they are staying, but they are not that committed to the Iranians coming back. So it's a difficult job for the Iranians, and I hope they'll fail. They're going to fail. We are going to make the best, make sure that this is the case.
General Sofrin, I'd like actually to focus in the last 2 minutes on the issue of the jihadists, particularly the Islamic State or Daesh, right now in collaboration between Damascus, Operation Inherent Resolve, and specifically the Kurds in the vicinity of Al-Hasaka, the El Hal camp, which housed up until recently over 60,000 members of the Islamic State and their families. We do see that the Syrian regime in Damascus is trying to reintegrate them into society, diverting them to Idlib. We see several thousands already being integrated there. Their ideology remains very steadfast on Islamic State ideals and jihad, something that does not necessarily break away from the reformed leadership, so-called, in Damascus. But nonetheless, that is a threat to both Israel as well as other countries that are concerned by those jihadists, as well as particularly to Iraq, where we are expected to see potentially some 20,000 being sent over to Iraq to be integrated once again into society there. Would that not threaten societies from crumbling down into potentially new pockets of Daesh or Islamic State?
I believe that this can destabilize a lot of areas within the Middle East. I will begin with Iraq. I believe that sending 20,000 people back to Iraq that have what we call different ideology and against the government and trying to establish their capabilities there and not to integrate within the Iraqi population and to become what we call peace lovers. I believe that this may pose a threat inside Iraq and may bring what we call another civil war within Iraq. That's the first issue. Regarding to what happens in Syria when they send them to Idlib, that means you concentrate all of them in some area of where they can, what we call, rebuild their ideology, replan their plans, and not necessarily they will think the same or go with the same idea of Ahmad al-Shara, because even though he came originally from their area of neighborhood, he's still has now another ideology, another thoughts, another strategy, which doesn't really match what they think about. And this may pose another threat inside Syria for the long run, not for the short run, for the long run, for the coming years, that may destabilize the whole northern area of Syria.
Well, maybe he can play it, on both sides. One day be Ahmed al-Shara, the next be Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. You never know, but we'll have to wait. Time will tell. I'd like to immediately thank General Cooperwasser and General Sofrin for all of your insight today, which was very valuable. I'd like to thank also our viewers at home. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.